day, and welcome to Africa Connect, where we try to converse on different stories across the continent. My name is Dhamanyari, and I'll be your co-pilot today on Everything African. Thank you for joining us, and we hope you make us your weekly staple. Today's episode is a special one, as it marks the beginning of what we hope will be a long relationship with you, our listeners. Joining me today is Dr. Paul Kariuki, the Executive Director of DDP. Dr. Paul, welcome.
Thank you so much, Thelma, for having me here, and good afternoon to all our listeners.
Thank you for having us as well. So today we hope to grapple with our headlining neighbor, Kenya. In the past weeks, we saw what has been understood as a revolutionary line of events led by the youth. For a bit of background, in an effort to reduce public debt and replenish the government financial reserves, the Kenyan government had proposed an increase in taxes on basic necessities in what we now know as the financial bill. So what started off as others would call it, hashtag politics, later broke out into mass demonstrations. Dr. Paul, could you share some light on that?
Thank you so much, Thelma. This is a very interesting kind of a revolution, I would say, in a Kenyan political history that has not had such a situation since independence, where young people took such big strides to protest against a bill that they are discomforted with because of implication it has on their social well-being, and of course the discontent that it has been generating over time because of the layers of discontent that the government has been almost chosen to be ignorant about, yet they can see them. And this generation of Kenyans born between 1997 and 2012, now come to be known as Gen Zs, have really made a statement to show that they can hold the government to account for its actions and decisions.
Okay, thank you so much for that. I mean, in the past, we've grappled with issues of political apathy, particularly when it comes to the youth, a sense of disinterest and disengagement within the youth when it comes to political matters. So with what has happened in Kenya, what effect do you think, or do you suppose these incidents can have on the continent, the African continent, that is?
Well, I think there are quite a few things that I would like to point out at this point. Firstly, it's the fact that young people have chosen to go a different path compared to their elders, which may include parents or guardians and other people who are older than this generation, that has been almost accepted the status quo. And these young people are saying no to that. They are saying no to corruption. They are saying no to high unemployment rates. They are saying no to low income levels. They are saying no to nepotism and favoritism that has really featured the current administration in terms of who gets what opportunities for living and for working. So that resistant voice coming from this generation suggests that the political landscape, not only in Kenya, but around the continent, because the issues that these young people of that generation are experiencing are almost the same that other youth in other African countries are also experiencing. And therefore, it's an emergence of a generation that is not going to tolerate what the older generations have tolerated for a long time. That's the first thing. And I think the second thing is also a suggestion that our political landscape now across the country and other countries on the continent is shifting because the new generation is exposed, educated, and highly informed about what they need to do to ensure that their future is guaranteed and protected. Now, the interesting part is that until this time, the status quo was to say, let's engage in dialogue. This generation is saying dialogues are over. It's either the current governments or administrations do the right thing, and the right thing here means saying create opportunities where every person, every young person has an equal opportunity to participate in an economy meaningfully. This generation, through this protest, has also led to an inclination towards the caliber of political leadership that they think should govern them. Currently, the political leadership that we have has not created room for inspiration. It may have started well, but with its second year into office, it's already showing that if young people do not take matters to the level they have taken them now in terms of holding them to account, there is probability that status quo will remain. That means corruption will increase, poor governance will become a norm, high unemployment, especially among the young people, will remain, as is, or even grow worse. It means that those young people will never have a chance to access higher education because the increase in taxes with poor revenue incomes means that they will not have money to be able to afford quality education, which also means that their future is already now no longer in the balance. It does not exist because what can they do without access to higher education? What can they do without better incomes? What can they do without access to good healthcare services and the rest of the stuff? So the predominance of politics over economic well-being of these young people is what has triggered this discontent that has come to an extent now, unfortunately, has led to the loss of lives. And on top of that, of course, many of them have been maimed and they're in hospitals whose future is also still very unpredictable at the moment.
Now, talking about access, I think one of the interesting things that we saw coming out of this incident, or rather these incidents, was the whole use of digital technologies, particularly when it comes to X, which in the previous day was called Twitter, and TikTok. What else could you add to that, particularly when we're looking at it from a point of view of political conversations or democratic actions or the sense of agency as well amongst the youth?
That's a very interesting aspect of it because the idea of young people to explore digital spaces to engage government is still like a foreign issue in most African countries. So the interesting distinction now to see with this generation is that they're able to explore a creative space such as Twitter and be able now to not only hold government accountable by asking key questions that government needs to listen to, but also to use that space to mobilize and connect with each other and galvanize support among themselves of a collective action that benefits every Kenyan. And I think this trend was long coming. I think it's just that in the past, X space was used for just connecting and just sharing, information here and there concerning what's happening, in society. But using X space for political accountability is a new phenomenon. And I think this is what this generation has brought now to the fore, that they can convene there and remain leaderless, remain faceless, and you won't even know who's setting the agenda. But the actions and the effects of their actions cannot be ignored. Yeah. So they use the creativity of using X space for political accountability and voicing out issues that perhaps will not be able to be done fairly and safely in another space. It's a phenomenon that is going to gain traction, in my view. And I'm sure all other African youth are watching what is happening in Kenya. It's not just yesterday I saw that Tanzanian youth also have started to raise issues. And the government is quick to say they can shut down that, technology space. So you see, young people have very innovative ways of connecting. And I think the older generation, which is firmly now represented by the current political leadership, is trying to find it difficult for them to adapt to how to engage young people in spaces that young people want, not the spaces that the current political leadership, which represent older generation, want. Young people do not care meeting in a room. The digital space for them is sufficient. And you saw, finally, the president of Kenya had to hold a dialogue with them on X Space. It's unheard of. But he had to do that because that's the only space they were willing to engage with. I'm sure that trend is not going to stop now. That is going to gain traction. And most African youth will start using that space effectively to hold governments accountable. And of course, it's a double-edged sword. The fact that the government holds resources, one thing it can do, and we've seen in different African countries in the past, is shutting down the space, which will mean, of course, that will be an undemocratic practice to do such, because most countries do espouse freedom of speech. However, that remains very much on paper, on their constitutions. And sometimes when it becomes in practice, they actually do the exact opposite. So it was a temptation, and I think that the Kenyan administration decided to do that to allow the space to continue, trending and being open, versus, the temptation of shutting it down and exercise, political authority in a way that will diminish all the gains of democracy that Kenya has enjoyed over the last 60 years.
I mean, speaking of, innovation and creativity, I think one of the things that we did not ignore is the fact that the continent is still one that's developing. And with that kind of like trajectory, you'd find that when it comes to internet connectivity, it's not, a resource that is available to all. You'd find that it could probably be available within the urban areas and not necessarily within the rural areas. And that, in a sense, ends up sidelining the youth voices within the rural spaces. So do you have anything to add with regard to that in terms of like accessibility and, giving the voice to the voiceless?
I think for me, X Space is one of that space that young people have found very useful, and be able to galvanize support and communicate with each other in a way that could mobilize massive, protest. But I also don't forget the other spaces like WhatsApp. I understand there was also a lot of mobilization that happened through that medium also. And they were able to communicate and plan the next sets of actions that were not predominantly said about or spoken about on X Space. So, and this is why they found most of the security agencies were found on their back foot, because while they monitored the X Space to find out, okay, where are they going tomorrow? The discussion was happening on another space that young people are very active. Yeah. And so that just tells you cannot muzzle the space for young people. They will still find ways to connect. They will still find ways to mobilize, and they will find ways to be able to lead themselves. What is interesting in this case is that while all these are happening, the president was able to read the science correctly and decided to tap into their discontent by agreeing to meet with them, on X Space, at least for starters. The bigger question for me here is, should the young people choose other spaces that are, may look unconventional, like a WhatsApp space? Will the political leadership be willing to transform and adapt? Because you have to engage with them. You've got to engage with them on the spaces where, they are comfortable to meet with you. And even now, one of the many things that leaves one very kind of glued up to what this generation is doing is the demand on meeting according to their terms, which is very much unheard of in many countries. You normally, the presidential team will announce that the president will meet people in place X. This generation said no. First and foremost, we can only meet you in this space only. And they stuck their guns, which means the political leadership had to bend and agree to meet them according to their terms. Now, this is an interesting trend because conventionally it doesn't happen that way.
True.
But these young people are saying, we are willing to pay the ultimate price, but we have to meet us at our terms. That is a very interesting phenomenon as far as youth activism is concerned and their understanding of political participation in shaping democracies in their countries. And what we have seen with this trend, it means that it will never be the same again, not only for the Kenyan youth, but for all other youths around the country and around the continent. The bigger question for the young people is they have seen from the Kenyan situation is that this kind of activism is costly and it means ultimate price. Will the other youths be willing to pay ultimate price if it has to get to that place to shape democracy and political representation in their countries? That's we're still going to watch and see how it will work out.
Thank you so much, Dr. Paul, for sharing your insights on this matter. Across the years, we've seen the resilience of the African youth and raising their voices. Nowadays, they're just doing it through their smartphones, just a tap of the screen or a touch of a button, and in so doing, spreading knowledge, spreading messages, mobilizing, coming together, fighting for one cause. And they're doing it, and through it, fighting against social injustices. So this is no surprise. Social media has become a coordinating tool for political movements in the past. For example, the hashtag This Flag movement of Zimbabwe, or the hashtag Rose Must Fall movement of South Africa. All these movements, by the way, were youth-led and spoken of, trending, shared, argued, posted on social media. So it'll be quite interesting to actually trace how social media has come to affect political outcomes in their efforts. The youth are actually changing political discourse. Is it for the better? Is another question. But for today, we leave it here, and we look forward to having our listeners joining us once again as we journey through this beautiful continent of Africa. Good day.